My name is Serena Calloway. I am 34 years old, and on the 14th of February, a Tuesday, the night the world was supposed to belong to love, I was lying in a hospital bed in the cardiac intensive care unit of Mercy General Hospital in Sacramento, California, with an IV line running into my left arm, a pulse oximeter clipped to my finger, and a heart monitor above my head drawing its slow, patient record of everything my body was doing. The room smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. The light was fluorescent and hummed at a frequency that is slightly too present to ignore. I could not lift my own arm without the monitor registering it. I could not speak above a whisper. The chair beside my bed, the one with the blue vinyl cushion that my husband had been sitting in earlier that evening, was empty. His name was Daniel Calloway. He had arrived at 6:37 in the evening. I know the exact time because the nurse had checked my vitals at 6:32, and he had walked in while she was still writing the numbers down. He brought flowers from the hospital gift shop, the kind in plastic cellophane from the cooler near the entrance. Pre-selected, no card. He sat in the blue vinyl chair for 41 minutes and spent most of them looking at his phone. He kissed my forehead when he stood to leave and said he needed to step out for a call about work, and he would be right back. He did not come back. At 23 minutes past 11 that night, I woke from a thin and medicated half-sleep to the sound of his voice in the hallway outside my room. A cardiac ICU at 11 in the evening is one of the quietest environments in the world. The nurse station was 2 doors down. The corridor outside my room was narrow and close. His voice carried clearly through the gap beneath the door, the way sound moves through quiet spaces, without effort and without mercy. He was not alone. I could hear a woman's voice, low and soft and distinct, the murmur of someone saying something close to another person's ear. But his voice I could hear with perfect clarity. He said, "She won't make it past the week. The doctor said her heart is too weak. We just have to wait it out." A pause. Her voice. Something I could not make out. Then he said, I know. But we can't do anything official until after. If we move now, it looks wrong. Just be patient." Another pause. "I love you. Go home. I'll call you when I leave here." I did not cry. I did not press the nurse call button. I did not shift or move or make a single sound that could travel beneath that door. I lay in the dark of that room and I listened to the heart monitor measure the work my body was doing to stay alive, and I let the watch on my wrist do what it had been calibrated to do. My cardiologist, Dr. Yolanda Fitch, had activated an ambient sound recording feature on my smartwatch 3 weeks before that night as part of an expanded sleep and environmental monitoring protocol. The recordings uploaded automatically to a secure cloud account tied to my patient profile at Mercy General. The account was in my name. The access was mine. Daniel did not know the feature existed. He believed the watch was tracking only my heart rate. He had not been present when Dr. Fitch had explained the monitoring protocol to me, because on that day in January, Daniel had told me he had a conference in San Jose. What he didn't know was that every word he said in that hallway was being archived on a server in my name. This is that story. To understand what happened on that Valentine's Day night, you have to go back 12 years. You have to understand the construction of a marriage that was built on a single foundational premise, that I was less capable than I believed myself to be, and that Daniel was the better judge of what I could and could not handle. You have to understand how a premise like that is laid, not all at once, not in any way that announces itself, but brick by quiet brick across years in which nothing dramatic ever happens, and yet something essential is slowly and methodically removed. I grew up in Fresno, California, the second of 3 daughters born to James and Patricia Weston. My father worked in agricultural equipment sales for the same company for 23 years. He was the kind of man who drove the same truck for a decade because he found loyalty to useful things, a reasonable and honorable position. My mother taught 3rd grade at Garfield Elementary for 22 years. She had the specific gift of teachers who genuinely liked children as individuals rather than as a category to be managed. And her classroom was always a little louder and warmer than the rooms on either side of it. We lived in a 4-bedroom house on Magnolia Street in a neighborhood where people knew each other's dogs by name. There was a fig tree in the backyard that my father had planted the year my parents moved in, and that produced more fruit than 4 people could eat every summer. My mother made sure we ate dinner together at the kitchen table every night without exception. It was a fully ordinary life, and I loved it with a completeness I did not have the vocabulary to describe until I had left it and found something to compare it against. I met Daniel Calloway at a graduate school orientation in Sacramento in September of 2012. He was 25 years old, studying business administration, tall and dark-haired, with the kind of confidence that presents as warmth until you have spent enough time with it to understand the difference between those two things. He was quick and funny and remembered details about people's lives without being reminded. He brought me coffee on our 3rd date and recalled, without being told a second time, that I took oat milk. I received this as evidence of love. I understand now that it was evidence of attention, which is not the same thing. Attention without care is only information, and information can be deployed in any direction. We married in June of 2015 at a small venue outside Sacramento. My parents were there. My sisters, Diane and Cora, were my bridesmaids. Diane was 29 and already building toward the wellness venture she would eventually turn into a real business. Cora was 23 and finishing her paralegal certification in San Jose. They both cried during the ceremony. My father cleared his throat repeatedly, which is what he does instead of crying. Daniel's mother, Beverly Calloway, came from Portland. She was a thin-lipped woman of 60 who wore her opinions like a second set of clothes and sat through the ceremony with an expression I could not name at the time. I know now what that expression was. It was the look of someone who has already calculated the ending and is watching the opening scenes with something between impatience and pity. Daniel was genuinely warm in the early years of our marriage. I believe that, and I think it matters to say it. He was funny at dinner parties, generous with compliments, made my parents feel liked when we visited, called them on their birthdays without being reminded. He made me feel chosen, which is a particular and powerful sensation, and he maintained it carefully for long enough that it became a lens through which I interpreted everything he did afterward. But beneath the warmth there was always a quieter current. It expressed itself in small moments, individually unremarkable, easy to explain away. The kind of moments that, described in isolation to another person, make the narrator sound sensitive and the person being described sound perfectly reasonable. What makes the pattern visible is not any single moment but the accumulation of them and the direction they all consistently run. The first time I understood the shape of the pattern with any clarity, we had been married for just under 2 years. I had been offered a promotion at the Sacramento Valley Healthcare Alliance, where I had been working as a program coordinator for 3 years. The role being offered was Senior Director of Operations. The salary would move from $68,000 per year to $94,000. I had been working toward this category of position since my graduate program. I came home and told Daniel at dinner, and I was genuinely, simply happy about it. He set his fork down on the plate. He arranged his expression into something resembling concern. "Serena," he said, "do you really think you're ready for that level of responsibility? Because I've watched you feel overwhelmed by what you're managing now. I'm not saying you can't eventually get there. I just don't want you to commit to something that gets too large and then affects your health. You know how you get when things pile up." I did not take the promotion. I called the hiring manager the following Monday and told her I appreciated the consideration but did not feel the timing was right. She was politely surprised. I told myself I was being thoughtful about my own limitations. I was not being thoughtful. I was being managed by a voice that had learned to sound exactly like my own conscience. 2 years after that, in the spring of 2019, my sister Diane called to invite me to co-found the wellness center she was launching in Folsom, 25 miles outside Sacramento. She had a physical location, a business plan that a community development bank had reviewed and offered to fund, and the particular, unstoppable energy of someone who's been planning something for a long time and is finally ready to act. She wanted me to come in as her operations partner. My portion of the initial investment would be $15,000, which I had saved independently in an account I maintained separately for my own use. This was my money, my sister, my field of expertise. Daniel and I talked about it at the kitchen table for 1 hour and 40 minutes. He never raised his voice, not once in that entire conversation. He laid out 14 specific concerns: market saturation in the wellness sector in the greater Sacramento area, Diane's lack of formal business training and her tendency, as he characterized it, toward enthusiasm over strategy, the commute from our house to Folsom, the time demands of a co-founder role alongside my existing job, and finally, my tendency, as he put it with particular steadiness, to overinvest emotionally in projects that require objectivity to survive. He said all of this with his hands flat on the table and his eyes holding mine in a way that felt like being taken seriously. By the end of the conversation, I had decided not to invest. Diane opened the center with a different partner. I found this out 18 months later, through a mutual acquaintance, not through Diane herself, because by that time Diane and I had not spoken in over a year. By 2022, 3 full years after I had been walked away from the investment, Diane's wellness center employed 3 full-time staff members, maintained a waiting list for its signature services, and had been featured in a Sacramento lifestyle publication. I did not know this when it happened because I was not speaking to my sister. And I was not speaking to my sister because Daniel had constructed a version of her in my thinking that bore little resemblance to who she actually was. He had not done this loudly. He had never said, "Do not speak to your sister." He had wondered aloud, over and over across a period of years, whether Diane's influence on me was good for my clarity, whether she was encouraging in me a kind of impulsiveness that had already gotten me into trouble, whether the energy I brought home after seeing her was the energy of someone who had been helped or the energy of someone who had been destabilized. He said it all gently and consistently, always with apparent concern for my well-being, until the opinion he had expressed so often became indistinguishable, to me, from my own perception. I began to believe I had chosen the distance. I had not chosen it. It had been chosen for me. What I did not know during any of those years, what I did not even begin to suspect until things had already begun to move, was that Daniel had been in a relationship with a woman named Claudine Marsh for 2 years and 9 months. Claudine was 31 years old, an auburn-haired marketing consultant whose firm occupied the 3rd floor of the same Midtown Sacramento building as Daniel's financial advisory company. She drove a silver BMW leased in her own name. She received $2,100 per month transferred from an account belonging to a company called Meridian Strategic Consulting, LLC, registered in California with Daniel Calloway as its sole officer. No strategic consulting was taking place. The company existed to organize funds and move them without visible connection to our joint finances. I also did not know about the second account, for $12,000, consolidated from various sources over an 18-month period, held in a separate account in Daniel's name alone, an account I had never seen, never been told about, never signed a document for. I learned none of this from intuition or confrontation. I learned it from a forensic accountant in Roseville, but to get to him, I first had to make a phone call that I had been avoiding for 3 years. In the autumn of 2023, I began to experience symptoms I told myself were stress, a tightness in my chest that arrived without occasion and left without explanation, a shortness of breath climbing stairs I had used for years without noticing them, a fatigue that came in the early afternoon and did not leave. I was 32 years old. I had always been healthy. I told myself what people who have always been healthy tell themselves, that it was work pressure, that I needed to sleep more, that I would drink more water and rest over the holiday weekend and see how I felt. I mentioned it to Daniel twice. The first time he said, "You always assume the worst. It's stress. Try to sleep more." The second time he said, "You know how you catastrophize. Let's not spiral over nothing." I did not make a doctor's appointment for 6 weeks. On a Wednesday morning in November, I lost consciousness in the parking garage of my office building. I hit my right shoulder on the car door going down and lay on the concrete for a period of time I cannot account for before a colleague named Priscilla found me and called 911. The paramedics took me to Mercy General. The cardiologist on call, a resident named Dr. Papadopoulos, ordered scans that identified a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a structural thickening of the heart muscle that had been present and progressing and entirely unmonitored for what the subsequent specialists assessed had likely been several years. Doctors Strassing, Yolanda Fitch became my primary cardiologist 3 weeks after that emergency admission. She was 50 years old, precise and deliberate, with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who has delivered enough difficult news to have made peace with the particular weight of it. She laid out my situation without softening it. The condition was serious and manageable with correct management. The future depended on medication compliance, significant stress reduction, and rigorous ongoing monitoring. She said all of this to me and to Daniel, who had come to that appointment and sat with his hands folded in his lap and asked careful, intelligent questions that would have sounded, to any outside observer, like a devoted and attentive husband. He drove me home. He made soup from a can and sat beside me on the couch with his hand over mine. I told myself I had been misreading things that were not there. In January of 2024, a serious arrhythmia episode brought me back to Mercy General. I woke in the kitchen at 3 in the morning with my hand pressed to my chest and the particular certainty of my body telling me something was wrong with a clarity that required no interpretation. Daniel was asleep. I called 911 myself and sat on the kitchen floor and waited for the paramedics and thought about the fig tree and my mother and my sister's voice on a voicemail I had listened to and not returned. It was during this first ICU admission on the 15th of January that Dr. Fitch sat beside my bed and explained the expanded monitoring protocol she was adding to my care plan. The ambient sound recording feature. The watch would capture environmental audio during designated rest periods. The recordings would upload to my patient portal account, accessible through the portal app on my phone or tablet. She was adding it because she wanted a full environmental picture, any disturbances in my rest environment, any irregularities in the ambient conditions that might correlate with cardiac events. She handed me a card with instructions. She was thorough. She was direct. She answered every question I had. Daniel was not at that appointment. He was at a conference in San Jose, or at least that was where he had told me he was. I was discharged in late January. I went home to the house on Ellsworth Avenue and spent the first afternoon back doing something I had not done in 3 years. I found my phone and I searched my contacts for the name I had been looking at and scrolling past for 37 months, and I pressed call. Diane answered on the second ring. She did not say, "Where have you been?" She did not list what had gone unreturned. She said, "Serena." Oh, thank God. I have been waiting. She flew to Sacramento on the 7th of January and stayed in the guest bedroom. For 3 evenings, during the hours when Daniel was at the gym or at dinner or places I had stopped asking about, Diane and I sat at the kitchen table under the pendant light, and I told her everything I had not said in 3 years. The promotion I had declined, the $15,000 I had not invested, the 14 months of unanswered texts, the voicemails I had listened to and set aside. The way the life I had been living had been gradually shaped, without my full awareness, into something I would not have chosen if the choices had been presented to me plainly. Diane sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still, the way our mother sat when she was being careful not to say the wrong thing before she knew all of it. On the 4th evening, she opened her laptop on the kitchen table and introduced me to the name Rosalind Akers. Rosalind Akers was a family law attorney with a practice in Sacramento. 53 years old, methodical, formidable in the specific way that comes from being patient while opponents mistake patience for hesitation, Diane had researched her 2 years earlier, after she had called for the 3rd time and received no reply, and had sat with the particular helplessness of someone who loves a person they cannot reach. She had found Rosalind and bookmarked the page and kept it there, waiting. Rosalind met with me by video call on the 8th of January. She listened for 40 minutes and asked questions in an order I later understood was designed to build the full picture before she offered a single interpretation. At the end, she said, "Before we do anything else, I need you to understand your complete financial position. Specifically, whether there are assets you are not currently aware of." She referred me to Gregory Weil, a forensic accountant practicing in Roseville. I drove to his office on the 12th of January. He was a man of about 45, methodical and entirely without the kind of judgment that would have made the conversation harder. He understood, in the specific way that forensic accountants must, that numbers are never about the numbers. They are always about the people who arrange them and what those people needed the arrangement to conceal. Gregory examined every financial document I could access without creating suspicion. Joint accounts, individual accounts, 5 years of tax returns, mortgage documents, credit card statements, home equity records. And then, because Rosalind had asked him specifically to look for undisclosed accounts and irregular transfer patterns, he looked further into the places that are designed not to be found. On the 21st of January, he located Meridian Strategic Consulting LLC. He traced $2,100 per month flowing from that entity to an account in the name of Claudine Marsh, beginning in April of 2021, continuous for 2 years and 9 months. On the 23rd of January, he found the second account, $412,000, Daniel Calloway's name only, opened without my knowledge, drawing from multiple sources over an 18-month period, not appearing on a single joint document I had ever been given. Gregory presented his findings to me on the 29th of January in a report of 31 pages contained in a manila folder. He walked me through the summary section first, as he did with all clients, he told me, so that the context was in place before the detail. He had a particular quality of steadiness in the way he explained things. The numbers did not embarrass him, and he did not allow them to embarrass me. He presented them the way a doctor presents a scan. This is what is here. This is what it means. What you do with it is yours to determine. I drove back to Sacramento with the folder on the passenger seat and did not go home. I drove instead to a parking lot off Sunrise Avenue that I had no particular history with, and pulled in and turned the heat to high because it was 41 degrees and gray outside. And I needed to be in a container of warmth before I opened the folder. I read all 31 pages. I read them slowly, from the summary through the appendices. The documentation of the Meridian account was precise, time-stamped, and exhaustive. Gregory had traced every transfer, $2,100, the same amount, the same date each month, 29 months of it. He had documented the source, the destination, and the account name with the same unhurried thoroughness he brought to everything. He noted in a sidebar that the monthly amount was specifically calibrated to avoid triggering bank reporting thresholds. This was not an accident of bookkeeping. This was deliberate. The second account section was shorter but denser. 18 months of consolidation. Multiple source accounts, some of which were familiar to me from our joint records. Others I had never seen. The movement of funds from the joint mortgage offset account in particular was documented across 6 separate transactions, none of which had ever appeared on a statement I had been given. I did not cry. I sat in the warmth of my own car with the folder open across the steering wheel and let the information arrange itself into its correct and complete shape. I thought about the promotion I had not taken. I thought about the $15,000 and the wellness center that now had a waiting list. I thought about 3 years of reasonable-sounding distance from my sister. I thought about the soup from a can and the hand over mine on the couch and the cardiologist appointment where Daniel had sat and asked such careful questions. I thought about a man who could track every detail of what I liked in my coffee and had used that same attention for years to track the exact dimensions of what I could be made to give up. I let myself understand it fully, without softening or excusing any part of it. Then I closed the folder. I put it in my bag. I started the car and drove home in the gray Sacramento afternoon, and I did not say anything at dinner that night. And the following morning I called Rosalind Akers and told her to move forward. Then I started the car and drove home. By the 9th of February, when I was readmitted to the cardiac ICU following another arrhythmia event, Rosalind Akers had already filed the initial divorce petition with the Sacramento County Superior Court under a sealed docket. Daniel would not be served until I chose the moment. Gregory Wiles' 31-page report was already in Rosalind's possession. The forensic documentation of Meridian Strategic Consulting LLC, the $412,000, and the monthly transfers to Claudine Marsh was complete. In the smartwatch on my wrist, activated by Dr. Fitch on the 15th of January for documented clinical purposes, had been recording ambient audio to my patient portal account for 3 weeks. I had not manufactured a trap. I had not arranged a confrontation. I had simply stopped pretending that the floor was solid and started building on the actual ground beneath my feet. If you are still watching this and something in this story is landing somewhere real for you, I want you to drop a comment right now and tell me which moment you recognized. Was it the promotion? The investment she was talked out of? The sister she lost contact with? Because I need you to know those are not minor details. They are the architecture of a specific kind of damage, and they happen across years, and they happen in a voice that always sounds like it is looking out for you. Please subscribe if you have not, because what comes next is what I built in the hours that man thought he was simply waiting me out. On the morning of February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, I opened my patient portal on the tablet Dr. Fitch had arranged for my use during the admission. I navigated to the ambient recording files. The timestamp read 11:23 post-meridiem, February 14th. The recording ran for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The hallway had been quiet at that hour. His voice was clear, close, unhurried, the voice of a man who believed he could not be heard. I listened to it twice. Then I forwarded the audio file to Rosalind Akers with a single line. This arrived ahead of schedule. She replied within 20 minutes. I'll be at the hospital at 10 tomorrow morning. Let Dr. Fitch know we may need a small meeting room. I sent a message to Diane that said only, call me when you can. Bring Cora. My younger sister Cora, 29 years old, drove from San Jose through the night and arrived at Mercy General before 7 in the morning. She had coffee for both of us and her phone fully charged. I spent the rest of that night lying in the dark with the monitor beeping its rhythm above me, and the ivy dripping and the hallway outside my door quiet again, and I thought about nothing dramatic. I thought about the fig tree. I thought about my mother's hands. I thought about a forensic accountant in a Roseville office who had spent 12 careful days finding things that were designed not to be found, and about an attorney who had filed a petition under seal and was now on her way to a hospital meeting room, and about a sister who had waited 3 years to answer on the second ring, and I thought, the ground is where I put it. It will hold. Daniel arrived at 11:14 on the morning of February 15th. I know the exact time because the nurse had noted it in the unit log when he signed in at the desk. He was wearing the gray jacket I had purchased for his 38th birthday from a shop on J Street. He carried a paper bag from the café 2 blocks from the hospital, the kind of small gesture that occupies the hands and gives the face something to arrange itself around. He smiled when he came through the door of my room with the practiced ease of a man who had no reason to expect the room he was walking into. Morning, he said. How are you feeling? Better, I said. Daniel, there are some people I'd like you to meet. He looked toward the doorway. Rosalind Akers stood in the corridor in a dark coat with her associate Priya Mehta beside her. Priya holding a leather document folder with the calm of someone who does this work regularly and finds it straightforward. Behind them stood Dr. Fitch, present in her formal capacity as my physician and as the activating clinician of the monitoring protocol, available to certify the recording's clinical chain of custody if necessary. And behind Dr. Fitch, standing close together and very still, were my sisters. Diane in her green wool coat, hands at her sides. Cora with her phone angled at a deliberate and unambiguous angle, recording video at my prior and explicit request. Daniel looked at them. He looked at me. The smile remained on his face but had become purely structural, a reflex operating without any feeling behind it. A wall doing the work of a wall with nothing on either side of it. What is this? He said. Please come in, I said. Close the door. He stepped inside but did not close the door. Rosalind reached past him and closed it herself. She introduced herself and Priya with the economy of someone who does not need the introduction to be received warmly. She told him she represented me in a dissolution of marriage proceeding filed with the Sacramento County Superior Court. She told him he would be formally served that afternoon. She told him that I had requested this meeting specifically so that he would hear the information from me, in person, rather than from a process server at an unexpected time. Daniel set the paper bag down on the bedside table. He was looking at Rosalind the way a person looks at something they are trying to measure from a distance. Rosalind outlined what the petition contained: Meridian Strategic Consulting LLC, the $412,000 in the undisclosed account, Claudine Marsh, and the $2,100 per month for 2 years and 9 months. The petition's citation of dissipation of marital assets. The request that the court examine the complete forensic record that Gregory Weil had assembled across 31 documented pages. The color left Daniel's face the way warmth leaves a room when the source is removed, not all at once, gradually. From the center outward. "Where did you get that?" he said. Not a question. The punctuation of a statement that has no room for an answer because it already knows what the answer is going to cost. Rosalind said, "There is also an audio recording captured on February 14th at 11:23 in the evening in the corridor outside this room by the ambient monitoring equipment associated with your wife's smartwatch, activated by her cardiologist, Dr. Fitch, on January 15th of this year, for documented clinical purposes, stored in your wife's patient portal account, and accessed by your wife from her own portal on the morning of February 15th. In that recording, Mr. Calloway, you state, and I quote, 'She won't make it past the week. The doctor said her heart is too weak. We just have to wait it out.' You follow this with, 'We can't do anything official until after. If we move now, it looks wrong. Just be patient.' You then express affection for the person with you and ask them to go home." The room was completely silent. The monitor above my bed marked the rhythm of my heart. Once, twice, 3 times. Slow, steady, present. Dr. Fitch stood near the window with her hands clasped, her expression entirely professional and entirely still. Diane had both hands pressed to her mouth. Cora did not lower the phone. Daniel stood at the foot of my hospital bed in the gray birthday jacket with the paper bag sitting behind him on the table and looked at me for a long moment. 12 years. 12 years of careful premise laying and managed perception and quiet diminishment. Standing in a hospital room at 11:22 in the morning in front of 5 women who had been very still and very busy while he had been certain they were only waiting. He said nothing. "Daniel," I said. My voice stayed exactly where I had kept it all morning. Level. Calm. Not unkind, not performing kindness either. Just steady. The way ground is steady. You don't need to respond right now. Your attorney will contact Rosalind. That is everything we need from this meeting." He picked up the paper bag from the bedside table. He looked around the room once, taking in each face. Dr. Fitch, Rosalind, Priya, Diane, Cora and her phone. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with the sound of an ordinary mechanism doing its ordinary function. Nothing dramatic. Just a door. Diane sat down in the chair beside my bed and took my hand and held it. She did not speak for a long time. Outside the small window across the room, Sacramento in February, was gray and very still. Eventually she said, quietly, "Serena, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said. "You came when I called." In the 6 weeks following that morning, Daniel's attorney made 3 separate approaches on his behalf. The first challenged the recording's admissibility, suggesting that questions of consent and collection method might create legal complications. Rosalind had anticipated this with complete precision. The ambient recording had been generated by medical monitoring equipment, activated by a licensed physician for formally documented clinical purposes, stored in the patient's own medical record, and accessed by that patient through her own credentialed portal account, a clinical document belonging to Serena Calloway. The challenge went nowhere. The second approach proposed that the undisclosed accounts had legitimate business purposes that had simply not been communicated with adequate clarity between spouses. Gregory Wiles' 31 pages addressed this interpretation in considerable and specific detail. The court found it unpersuasive. The third approach was personal. Daniel sent a text message to my phone on the 22nd of February. It said, "I made mistakes. I know that. But we had 12 years, Serena. That has to count for something." I read it once. I set the phone down. I did not reply. He was right that 12 years counted for something. They counted toward a thorough, documented, and complete understanding of exactly how I had been underestimated, and precisely how wrong that estimate had been from the beginning. During the months between February and the August finalization, I received one unexpected message from Priscilla, the colleague who had found me on the parking garage floor in November. She had heard through the hospital grapevine that I was going through something significant, and she wanted me to know that she had always thought I was one of the most capable people at the Alliance. She said the day she found me on the concrete floor, she had thought, "This person is still going to do something remarkable, even now." I sat with that message for a long time. It is a strange thing to be seen by someone while you are lying on a floor. The divorce was finalized on the 14th of August in the Sacramento County Superior Court. The settlement included my equitable share of the marital home, an appropriate division of all documented joint assets, and an additional award reflecting the dissipation finding regarding the funds Daniel had moved without disclosure. I do not discuss specific settlement amounts. What I will say is that I had enough to begin again, entirely on my own terms with no accommodation required of anyone. Beverly Calloway called me once, in October, 3 months after the finalization. She said she was sorry for how things had turned out. She said Daniel had always had a way of taking things too far. She said this with the practiced sadness of someone who had seen it before and had chosen the path of not intervening. I thanked her. I said I wished her well. I meant it. The way you mean something that is true and simply no longer relevant to the life you are living. I moved to Fresno in September, 20 minutes from Magnolia Street and the fig tree and the kitchen table where my mother still sets dinner every night without exception. I took the director of operations role at Diane's Wellness Center, which had by then grown to a second location in Elk Grove and was expanding fast enough to need someone who understood both the clinical and operational dimensions of the work. The woman who had been talked out of investing $15,000 in the center's founding was now the person making the decisions about its future. The first morning I drove to the Folsom location and parked and sat in my car looking at the building. I did not do anything dramatic. I just sat there and let the ground be exactly as solid as I had built it to be. My father came to my apartment in Fresno the first 3 Saturdays after I moved in and found things that he said needed attention. A cabinet hinge. A faucet washer, a light fixture that flickered occasionally. None of them needed attention in any urgent sense. He just needed to be there doing something useful with his hands, which is his language for "I love you, and I am here, and I did not see clearly enough while you were far away, and I am sorry for the years of not looking in the right direction." I received it exactly as offered, without requiring it to be said in any other language than the one he has always used. My mother brought food and sat at my kitchen table and asked about my day with the specific and unhurried attention she had given every child in her 3rd grade classroom for 22 years. She did not ask me to explain or revisit or relitigate. She just asked about my day and listened to the answer and refilled my glass and asked about tomorrow. It was, I came to understand, the most restorative thing available to me at that particular point in my recovery. Not analysis. Not processing. Just someone asking about Tuesday and meaning it. Diane and I talk every day. We eat lunch together 3 times a week in the small office behind the front desk of the Folsom Center, sharing food from a Thai place 3 blocks away, talking about the business and the staff and the things that happened in the world while we were not in contact. She never says "I told you so." That is not her language. Her language is showing up, and it has always been, and showing up is the most useful language there is. I want to say something now to anyone watching this who knows what it is to have their own judgment quietly removed from them across years in which nothing dramatic occurs. Anyone who has been told, in a patient and reasonable and apparently caring voice, that they are too sensitive, too ambitious, too impulsive, too much of whatever particular quality makes them difficult to keep small. I want to say this carefully because it matters more than the rest of what I have said. The process of being managed in the way I am describing is designed to be invisible from inside it. The voice is never loud enough to push back against. The concerns expressed are always just plausible enough to accept as genuine. The alternative interpretation, that the concern is not about your well-being but about keeping your well-being where it is convenient for someone else, that interpretation feels, from inside the situation, like paranoia. It feels like the very thing they have been warning you about. Your oversensitivity, your tendency to catastrophize, and so you dismiss it. The same way you have learned to dismiss every other instinct that runs contrary to the version of yourself that has been assembled around you. This is not a failure of intelligence. Intelligent people live inside this structure for years. This is a response to sustained pressure from a trusted direction, and the pressure is designed not to feel like pressure, but like love. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this experience that is almost impossible to articulate, and that I have not heard described accurately anywhere. It is not the loneliness of being isolated, although isolation is often part of it. It is the loneliness of being unable to verify your own perceptions. You have a feeling. You examine it. You apply the interpretation that has been given to you about who you are and how your feelings work, and you conclude that the feeling is probably your sensitivity again, your catastrophizing again, your impulsiveness or your over-emotionality or whatever word has been placed most reliably between you and your own knowing, and you put it down, and you move on. And this happens so many times across so many years that you eventually stop checking the feeling at all. You simply wait for someone else to tell you what it means. The morning I sat in that parking lot and read Gregory Wile's 31 pages was the first time in several years that I had held a piece of information and allowed it to mean what it actually meant, without first running it through the interpretation I had been handed. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like standing in a room with different proportions than the room I remembered, same walls, different size. It felt like the beginning of something I could not yet name. What I know now? Standing on the other side of a forensic accounting report and a sealed court petition and a 4-minute 17-second audio file and a divorce that was finalized on a Tuesday in August, is that the rebuilding is not complicated. It does not require a confrontation staged for an audience, though sometimes the audience is simply the consequence of what you have already quietly built. The rebuilding requires a phone call. It requires 31 pages read in a parking lot in the cold. It requires a doctor who explains a watch feature clearly and hands you a card with instructions. It requires a sister who has been sitting with her phone and a bookmarked page and the specific patience of someone who refuses to stop waiting. I built it in silence. Not because silence is the most powerful option, but because silence was where I actually lived, and everything I needed was already there in reach. Already mine, waiting only to be picked up and used. That is the thing that people who have decided you are finished do not understand. They watch you lie still, and they believe they understand what stillness means. They stand in a hallway at 11 at night and say, "Wait it out," and they believe that the waiting belongs to them. They bring plastic-wrapped flowers and sit for 41 minutes and scroll their phones and kiss a forehead and leave. And they believe the room behind them is simply what it appears to be. A woman in a bed, a monitor, a door. They do not know about the 31 pages. They do not know about the attorney in a dark coat waiting in a corridor with a leather document folder. They do not know about the feature running on the watch they thought was only tracking a heart rate. They do not know that the sisters drove through the night. They do not know about the ground. When I think about Daniel in that hospital room on the morning of the 15th, picking up the paper bag, turning to look at each face in that room, at the particular stillness of 5 women who had been very quiet and very organized and had simply let him arrive. What I feel is not what you might expect. It is not triumph. It is not the satisfaction of a confrontation won. It is the feeling of a floor that holds when you step on it, the feeling of ground that was laid carefully and documented thoroughly, and that is yours, entirely and without negotiation. He thought he was waiting me out. He was not waiting me out. He was not waiting me out. He was simply in a hallway outside a room where something he had never accounted for was already running. To every woman watching this, who is in the middle of her own quiet build right now, who is making the calls and reading the documents and keeping the records and saying nothing yet while someone else believes they understand her timeline, I want to say this directly. They are wrong about your timeline. They cannot see what is running on your wrist and the ground you are laying. In the quiet hours when others believe you are simply enduring, that ground will hold. Have you ever had someone mistake your silence for surrender, only to find your silence had been keeping records all along? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And to everyone who has stayed with Revenge Chronicles through this entire story, through every detail and every quiet step, I want to say something that is not a script. These stories are not easy to tell. They require going back into rooms that still have a temperature and a smell and a fluorescent light that hums. They require saying the precise and careful things that are hard to say because being precise means not being able to look away. You show up for every one of them. At every hour of the night when something in a story reaches something in you that needed to be found, you are there. That is not nothing. That is the whole reason these stories get told. We are a team of 3 who believe without qualification that every woman's story of being underestimated and quietly outworn deserves to be told with the same precision she used to survive it. With the help of AI narration and the raw material of real inspired lives, we bring these stories to Revenge Chronicles every day. Because the quietest comebacks are not just the loudest, they are the most lasting. Subscribe if you have not. Tell someone who needs this that it exists. Come back tomorrow. We will be here.